Last week we began looking in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 at the various descriptions of what love does. And it is important within that context to emphasize that love is not simply a passive feeling, but in this idea of understanding agape love, which again is that which builds relationships, seeks out to build and maintain relationships. And in doing that, because of the nature then of that love, it is not something that is simply that we sit back and enjoy, but rather something that we use to fuel and build our relationships with all those around us. And so as we considered how that works, it starts kind of off and talks about when things are going well, and the conflict, he starts off with conflict. You have situations of conflict. Love needs to be inserted when there's some conflict there. When things are going well, you need to also maintain that idea of the positivity of what you can offer and what other people bring in, rather than just building yourself up in that process. That when you are around others, especially non-Christians, that you consider what love would do to make that relationship strong. And that's when you got down and saw in verse 5, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own. Either one of those gonna hurt a relationship. So now we want to get here in the middle of verse 5, and it says, is not provoked. Is not provoked. Now, I mean, just technically, when you look at what that word is, that's pretty good as a way to see it, but it is the idea of easily prodded. Okay? This is, the easiest way to say this today is, love is not easily offended. Love is not triggered by small things. Because we're talking about relationships, and think about how, if we are petty in terms of the things that bother us about what someone might do, that we view any kind of thing that maybe something someone says disagrees or pushes us, or maybe that they said something that kind of took us down a notch, and anything like that, and that, we're just done. That any little thing, in an age in which, see, people a lot of times, if you are not totally on board for stroking their ego all the time and, filling them up, if you're not agreeing with every single opinion they have, if you're not liking every post they make, then somehow you can offend some people. Oh, why didn't you like my post? I don't know. I wasn't online. It was dumb. There could be a lot of reasons. That's CGI. Stop. There could be a lot of reasons why I might not like your post. We can get different things. It's kind of like I try to tell people is you don't have to comment on everything that you view. It's not a requirement. Okay? But sometimes we're just living in a world where it's easy to get offended because we've been told culturally that anything that is not positive toward your ego is itself offensive. That kind of, is that's somehow bad. Now, what that does, I'll just warn you, I think most people understand this, got some experience to you in life, is that you talk about a recipe for raising soft people emotionally. That's it. If you can't handle being told you're wrong, you can't handle a little bit of criticism here and there, and you can't handle that maybe admitting that, I got that one wrong. Well, that's why when you end up with these ideas where you cannot, any kind of disagreement just causes someone to implode. When you see what he's saying here in this verse, though, with the idea of is not provoked, is that it's even stronger than that, in the sense that there are some people that will just try to push your buttons. Okay, I see some of you people have been there. I'm closing my eyes. I feel like some spouses have just elbowed one another. I'm not sure. Okay, now, the thing is that you just go around, they're going to keep picking at you and picking at you and picking at you until they get a reaction, because that's who they are. There's some people, you ever seen them, they try to get a reaction out of you. That's it. Okay. And what we need to realize is that in all of these things, to try to be the person who is more committed to the relationship than clearly that person has in ever having one is a hard thing to do. It's a whole lot easier to write people off, go right back at them, right? Retaliate. Maybe not retaliate directly, but maybe we can, be a little passive aggressive about it. But the whole idea here is that does the relationship matter or not? I'm going to keep coming back to this. And that is what should be the controlling factor in our behaviors. So that when you come down, and he is talking about, all these little things people say or do, and some of them, you know how often people will say something and they mean nothing big about it. They don't mean anything. Some people don't know any better. Some people will insult you and don't know they insulted you. Right? That's just how it is. I mean, you just go in because they've got an opinion. And of course, nowadays what we've discovered is the most important thing to have is an opinion. I say that truthfully and yet sarcastically. Is that somehow I can have an opinion about you. Well, if that's the kind of situation where we find ourselves, then that makes it hard to make sure we're doing everything to have the right kind of relationships with people who themselves sometimes make it harder to kind of like. You ever been in those situations where someone just kind of makes it hard to like them? Okay, I'm not going to tell anybody. It's all right. It's just not taking names here. It's just real life, right? That person just kind of, not my cup of tea. I don't care if they're around the corner. I don't need to see them. Maybe that's true. But the thing is we're trying to find ways, if we are loving people, to still be able to provide whatever God can provide through us if that person needs us to. And when we're easily provoked by anything that someone does, it's harder, if we're not viewing them through love, to go ahead and do what maybe is needed. I had a woman come through a pantry one time, and we were trying to provide her food, and she went through, and I guarantee you, she went through picking through our pantry like she was shopping at some exclusive store, only to find the absolute best stuff that she could pull out, rather than respond as someone who's thankful that she has something. Now, in that moment, I hope that the look of incredulity did not pass, that was in here, did not come through my face. But sometimes you just wonder what's going on. We're trying to show love, but some people haven't ever seen it. And for people to see love, there's got to be a consistency in how you treat them in a relationship if you're going to get a relationship. Because otherwise, some people, when they're trying to provoke you, it's a test because maybe how they grew up. That's how they know to interact. And so we're going to have to be better and stronger internally to not be easily provoked because they're looking for an excuse. Okay? You see that, So love is hard. I think that one of the biggest things that's happened the way people throw around love and for years in our culture is we act like it's easy. And that's a lie. Love is not easy. Not true love. It is not easy at all. And that's really what Paul is teaching us here. Now, the next one, he says, thinks no evil. Now, this is important, and the word choice matters here. Okay. Do we have any other translations, maybe, other than thinks? That maybe you find? Everyone's consistent translation? Takes no account. Takes no account. Is that ASV? Takes no account. That's truer to the core meaning of the word, which is normal for ASV. Keeps no account, okay. It's an accounting word. That's why I like that is more literal. But it's the idea of reflecting on. But it is, or keep, you'd say, maybe if you were to really lean into that word, you'd say keeping a ledger. Okay? You know, this person, like all the television shows, this person wronged me. You're on my list now. Okay. So you go through and they did this. I got to get him back for that. But I don't need to count. You're on a bad list. Okay. That's kind of the idea here of does not reflect on the evil. But it's not on just reflecting on the fact of evil in life, though that would be a positive thing too. But contextually, remember, all of this is aimed out in terms of relationships because the nature of what this is doing. It's not just, oh, I'm wondering about things, but it's the idea of I'm not just going to keep a list of everything that person has done wrong. Go ahead, Star. No, that's different. That's a good question. You can't help but remember. But the thing is that you're not, the difference of I'm not actively trying to maintain something that would keep me from doing the right thing for them. Is that if we keep up, you're going to be wronged, and you're going to have to. That's just a reality of it. It comes up, but it's the idea of where I can always refer to my list to remind myself of why I don't like that person. Okay, that's different than things that have been done recently. This is just there and it needs to be addressed, right? And there's some things that are so deeply hurting that you can't get away from. It's not like you can just move that out of your mind. But the question is it controlling, and that's being the active ingredient in how you build a relationship or maintain a relationship. If in the relationship, all you're doing is taking the list of everything bad the person's ever done, that relationship can't possibly go right. So it's not that we are going to step away from wrongs committed, because we know from other passages that we can't be helpful in someone's spiritual situation because if they haven't repented, because they've got wrongs done and they can't correct it unless it's pointed out they've done wrong. So we know that has to be a balance of it. So it has to do for our mindset. Am I viewing this person solely in terms of the list of wrong rather than what can I do to get them right? It's a very different kind of way to see people. This is one kind of an excuse not to like somebody list, excuse of why they deserve what they get list, versus I want what's best for that person, this isn't helping list. That's kind of the way I would keep it. So we have to keep that in mind so that we're giving enough in that relationship that this person is doing stuff, and I'm not making it. Love doesn't make an excuse for that either, right? Love doesn't make an excuse for people's sin, mistreatment. That's not what love does, because God doesn't. He's love. So we don't make excuses for it, but it also does not inform how God acts toward the wrong committed. He's been wronged more than any of us, right? God's been wronged the most of all, and so he's the model for what do. You still do what is best for that person, even as they're shoving you away, which is what has happened when we sin against God. Now, does that mean that God looks and says everything's fine? No. He says, things need to be righted. And that's an important balance when we understand love. Tracy? Yeah. Yes. Correct. And that's why, that is, she says, we get to the point where we don't see them as a soul anymore. We don't see their value and the possibilities anymore because we're only focused on the evil, on the wrongs. And that's kind of the core of it. And why I wanted to get to the nature of this word is that it really has to do, is this what we're keeping our mind on, and how because it ends up defining us as much as them. Well, that person doing bad things is allowing that to define themselves. What we can't, in response, is let their wrong define us. Is that making any sense to y'all? You've got to make sure your attitude toward them, that it doesn't become defined by the way they've acted. That's why it's not easily provoked. And this, think no evil, are kind of tied together by Paul here. Charlotte. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the counter strategy you have to do, is that you have to keep in mind what there is good there. I mean, I don't want to apply too much pop culture reference, but sometimes we have to be that person that says, there's still good in him. He's Darth Vader. There's still good in him, okay? You have to realize, though, that is true. And so your commitment is never to justify or any of the wrong actions. And it's kind of, we're looking a little bit ahead to verse 7 about to still maintain what is possible. And that's why it takes so many different behaviors to be able to really flesh out what love does. It's not just one thing. It's a broader spectrum of all these things working together. Yes, Sandra? Are you in verse 6 now? Okay, yeah, that's good. Good. Now we can segue. Perfect. Verse 6. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Another pair. Okay, another pair joined together here and that have a relationship with one another. Okay, go ahead, Hayden. No, not contextually. I think that if anything, that's going to come from what's said in verse 7, but not from here. Does not rejoice in iniquity. The word here, just so you know right now, they are highly related word when it says one rejoice and then rejoices. The difference is the second rejoice has an additional word tied into it that they often would do in Greek. It's rejoices together. It's the idea of coming together and being tied up with truth. So that in this one with rejoicing, what you don't want is, you don't want in rejoicing in that iniquity, you don't want the idea of that kind of thing coming on and like that gets you happy in a separate thing. You want to be tied to what truth is. So that tells you that truth and iniquity are intended as kind of opposites here to some extent. Okay, so, but the whole idea of what you find joy in is the key when you put those together. What do you find joy in? And this is circumstances. What are we looking at in the circumstances that we say, okay, that it's iniquity? Let's think of another word here because of, does anyone have another word for iniquity? You had wrongdoing, evil, unrighteousness, which is the most literal. It's also the idea of injustice. And that is in terms of the standard. If you think about with truth, which is an ethical word, but for standard. And so you have a little bit here of, it all will come together on the wrongdoing and iniquity of this. Is it love because of when you want for others? It has to do with something that is in regard to the proper standard. And just because, say when something bad happens to someone, and it was not right. What was happened to them, it was not the right thing. Someone didn't follow procedure or anything, and we still kind of say, well, you had that coming. It doesn't matter how. That would fall into this category of that that's unjust. It wasn't fair, the approach that was taken. You could also have the idea that you go in and say that you have the wrongdoing, and this kind of has to do with any of these things you would rejoice at, of what makes things harmed unto somebody. We can accept, for example, certain things, justice. There is a difference here because it has to do with justice. When there has to be justice, that's different in a sense. We can rejoice that justice is done without rejoicing at, say, the fact that meant that there is a soul lost. Right? We need to make sure that we understand both of those things. Okay, a terrorist who's killed 500 people being killed is justice. It's still sad because that's still one soul separated from God forever. Do you understand? Brock? Mm-hmm. Partially. This is the idea. That's why I say this word is it's a broad word. Okay, so you have the old idea of those things that would not fall under a category of being what is good for people in general, and that you're just, we would say that we look at what somebody did, and if we don't like them, or maybe we're jealous when we bring this out and something bad happens, and that we feel somehow good because that person has something bad going on. Okay, they got what they deserved, or karma. I don't think anybody knows what that actually is coming from, but that whole idea is that when your worst enemy gets cancer, that's still sad, isn't it? And they didn't deserve it any more than your best friend gets cancer. Okay? Then it's actually a reflection of you, in that you were taking and getting some joy out of something really bad happening to somebody. Well, that's not love. What relationship is that? So that's kind of where all this is going, David. I guess it could be. We'll talk later. That's right. We don't ever want to do that. There's got to be some separation there. Go ahead, Ron. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, that's really good. Yeah, that's a good point. Is that, and what Ron says, time the things together. If you can have a situation where you love someone, but what they're participating in is the wrong thing. And that we have to make sure that we're not, by our behavior in the relationship, and this actually gets harder the closer the relationship is. That if they're involved in sin, in iniquity, wrongdoing, injustice, their behavior, that we can't in any way make that part of our relationship. That's where the line is. You can't be bringing it in to make and incorporating a protection, we'll get to this in a minute maybe, of their wrongdoing. I mean, that's the whole idea of kind of almost in legal terms, is you become an accomplice after the act. And that's what you don't want to do that. Love does not do that. Love does not, in the relationship, protect the wrongdoing in somebody. Okay? So, because that's not love. God never does that. He doesn't ever reach out and love you so much he protects your wrong. He wants that to change. He's loving you despite the wrong, and does not do anything to promote the wrong. So that's a really good point and application of this. Okay, Saria? Yes. If they're continuing, if the nature of the relationship is such, you're being long-suffering and they're trying to provoke you to do evil, that's just the conversation, is that I cannot continue along this line so long as this is your behavior. I like you as an individual, but this is part of your life I don't want to be a part of. And that I think would help separate what Ron is pointing out, is that you can say something positive about them while trying to initiate that there are certain things in your life yet you don't need in your life. There you're doing exactly what God is wanting to do and what he does in his word, and that you have to step away at some point, maintaining just to those behaviors retain enough, if you can, and this depends on them. Remember, that's looked at Romans chapter 12 in principle on Wednesday night. As much as lieth within you, right, is that you're going to do your part, but they have to reciprocate. They have to make it possible, too. So there is a role there that they have. Hayden? When is it absolutely necessary to separate yourself from someone? First of all, when it becomes influential in your own life. 2, when it becomes to the point of where it is detrimental to your influence with others. And I mean that not because people, you got Mr. Super Judgy over here. I'm talking about in real terms. And also that you have to be super aware, self-aware. Because usually that we go past that tipping point. But you're also looking for, am I actually influencing that person? Where's the influence going? And a lot of times we want to have influence in that moment, and we stick around to have influence, but in actuality they're having more influence than we are. And that's the line you don't want to get into. So you've got to be self-aware to be able to do this. You've got to be highly intentional about what you are doing with someone. Going in, we tend to go in very passively in relationships and not with people who are in sin and don't have, if you will, a plan. We don't have a game plan to try to help them. We think that our presence there naturally, because spirituality just oozes out of me, and you just it's like air freshener. Just, here I am. Doesn't work that way. So we actually need a more direct plan with it involved. And so I'd say that's really where you are. Can you just hang out and do something fun? Well, sure, but what are you adding to that to try to make a distinction? Are you saying, sure, I'll go to the game with you. Are you okay, no alcohol? I need to know first. Say, you're adding in an element that they would probably not consider, and by planning ahead, you're avoiding an uncomfortable situation of no influence in the moment. Okay, so those are the kind of things we have to think about. We need to make sure we're having a plan in those relationships, and that actually will clear up where we think those problems are, if we'll be more active in where the plan is and where our relationship with that person lies. Brock? Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, good. It was Brock saying, going back to what we looked at in chapter 9, about how Paul would adjust his what he would do based upon, and these are all cultural things, remember, and he got judged by the Jews for doing so. Okay, was he doing anything wrong? Absolutely not, and that's the key. He was never doing anything wrong, nor even given the impression of doing wrong, but you had the negative idea of people wanting to call something wrong in order to bring his influence down. That's why he had to respond to that. Okay, well, why? Because it was against the gospel. It wasn't direct. He wasn't responding because it hurt his feelings. He was responding because it was going to hurt the gospel if he didn't. And that's an important distinction that we need to make as well. Okay, go ahead, Charlie. Yes? Yeah, and that's why we need to go through, back to the lesson this morning, but going and make sure that we're aware from God's Word and letting that be the guide. You say, here are the specifics of Scripture. Well, what do I do in this circumstance? Where's our line? Okay, now we're looking at how did Jesus handle similar situations? Okay, and then apply all those. Usually the problem comes for us is when we want to apply one principle at a time. Christianity is a whole lot more than one principle. Okay, and so while Jesus introduced that and love is at the core of that for our context today, Matthew 22, 37 through 40, both the love we have for God and the love for one another, for our neighbor. Okay, the problem is, of course, of people defining that love however they want. That's one of the great things about this description list being here, is whenever we see love your neighbor, he's now providing you very specific actions and attitudes that go hand in hand with how you should treat anyone. If you go through love your neighbor as yourself, key principle of following the law and Christianity, tie that with Luke chapter 10, and that who is my neighbor, that's about the Good Samaritan, and it's about being the right kind of neighbor. It means being proactive and applying this kind of love to everyone, and therefore when we look at this list here of things love does, we must be considering, how does this interact? What am I doing within family that I'm close to? How does this look when I'm around family that are kind of a problem for me? How does it happen? How am I applying this to people at work? How am I applying this to people that at school? And then in both, you've got people that I get along with and people I don't. And you've got to be able to take these and say, in my behavior, in those situations, what are people seeing? What am I doing, and is it visible that this is how I'm applying it? That's why it's hard. Okay? So let's make sure we cover, but rejoices in the truth. Because this is a positive thing. This is not just the negative. Love is not just pulling out the negatives, right? It's also reinforcing positive about truth. Now here's the standard, but it's also, truth is not just law. There's a difference between the idea of truth as a standard and being law. Truth is that which is rooted in God's character. The standard rooted in God's character of being light. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 5, that is expressed. So that's why he ties that together throughout both John and 1 John. He ties those together with us. And we end up with this truth as what is the absolute highest standards ethically we can follow. And that's what we rejoice in. And this goes back to, can you rejoice yourself in the best thing of doing the best thing possible for somebody, and seeing the best outcome and the best action, best outcome for anybody in a relationship? Is that where your mind is? If you rejoice, are you so tied to the truth that when that person aligns with truth, no matter how much animosity there was previously, it's no problem? Matter of fact, being so tied in with truth brings the joy out in you in that relationship. You know, to get where this is, remember in Philemon where Paul sends Onesimus, a runaway slave, back to his previous owner? Onesimus has changed. He's telling Philemon Onesimus has changed. And he's counting on the Christianity of Philemon and his spirituality and his love for the truth and the changes that Onesimus has made to mean that there's going to be a meaningful change in their relationship. Why? He's counting on Philemon rejoicing in the truth. The truth accomplishing something, the truth affecting Onesimus, the truth about Onesimus. You know, when I hear someone who's a nemesis in high school, okay, I mean, the only time you'd have someone really cause me problems, we're friends on Facebook. Now, he's not a Christian still. But at least at least that barrier is gone. Okay? Can you reach out and still want the best for someone who committed crime against you? I know it's hard to imagine. I've lived through it, so it's not hard for me. Okay? Can you do it? And that to find out that there's even possibilities there with Christ. Genuine joy. Because of what you rejoice in. Sandra, you had some?
I appreciate that you keep bringing it back to it's your attitude. When people read this, they want to read about that. And when you keep bringing it back, because the whole thing is about your attitude as an individual and how you act.
Thank you. I do think that when most conversations get at love, in our heads we're thinking, love treats me well. Love rejoices in me. You know, we get that kind of that idea instead of understanding, no, this is responsibility and in difficulties. And so, yeah, it's a hard thing. I want to go ahead and introduce the next part to get started. Okay, go ahead, Ron. Good. Yeah. That's right. Now this is good. I want to build on that more because I like that. The idea of course, but the idea of you like the truth so much that having that in your life, that is enough. That it's especially what you said about it's an absolute standard, and that actually takes so much pressure off. You're not spending time trying to judge people according to how you feel in a moment. That's the kind of love people a lot of times are using in life. And they're all in, and you can tell. It's like this emotional kind of thing with people that has no tie to a standard. It's not godly love. God's love never moves away from the fact of the truth of who He is. Okay? They are presented together. And when we get caught up in that, then number one, our standards of how we treat people are going to vary greatly. It's just going to be out of control. And also, I want to tie into this because what you can do is about yourself. Okay? When you rejoice in the truth, this is the means by which whatever is going on, you're not measuring your love by the response either. We're responding to difficult people sometimes, we need to love them, but it also means I'm not judging how much I love based upon their response. I'm judging how much I love based upon whether or not I've shown them Christ in my life and that I'm being true to what the standard requires of me. That's the tie-in with, I said about those verbs earlier, that this one means together with. You've tied yourself together with truth. And that means that you're committed to that being the guide of how you measure what you're doing and how you're interacting in your relationships as you try to reach as many people as you can. And so I really appreciate that going along with that. Now, let's get a preview now is looking into verse 7. This is the one part of it that's easiest to remember, right? They all go together. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And it's flipped. All things is actually the first thing said in each phrase in the original. So all things bears, all things believes, all things hopes, all things endures. That emphasis now, and I want you to think about this, all. And that is what happens if he's talking about love here. You don't make exceptions. If it's the all, we'll have to wait till next week to discuss the actual behaviors of this. But by putting all here each time, The whole idea is that you're acting a certain way, and there's a consistency toward situations and toward people that have to do with your character being infused with this kind of love that then say, this is just who I am. And because love is just simply being applied in these situations. And that's really what this part is getting to. Okay. The other thing I want you to take a look at is, to get ready for next week, is what is the difference between bears all things and endures all things? Aren't those kind of the same word? Well, they're not the same word, but the same idea? That's where trying to figure out how that is being used. And I think the first word is the key here of having a little bit different usage enters in. So that's just a little tidbit there of how I think this works out. Now, all of what he is doing now with all these things, that is a focus more, if we're looking at it ahead, is in relationship. So we notice all throughout, it's how this is going to look toward people in relationship. But we've just kind of been dealing with circumstances, the right and wrong of the circumstance. But now we're looking at how does this play out, these four now categories within making relationships good for the long term. I want you to maybe give that as a little bit of a perspective, and we'll pick up there next week.